If you would stand for the reading of the Word. Acts 6:1. In those days when the number of disciples was increasing, the Hellenistic Jews among them complained against the Hebraic Jews because their widows were being overlooked in the daily distribution of food. So the 12 gathered all the disciples together and said, "It would not be right for us to neglect the ministry of the Word in order to wait on tables. Brothers and sisters, choose 7 men from among you who are known to be full of the Spirit and wisdom. We will turn this responsibility over to them and give our attention to the prayer and the ministry of the Word." The Word of the Lord. You may be seated. One minister said, "My predecessor's library haunted me." His predecessor had left his entire library intact. But what's sad about that is that he had not left with his faith intact. And I think his leaving his library was symbolic of his journey of ministry. In fact, this minister went on to talk about, he said he felt like looking at that library that had been left behind told the story of his predecessor's ministry. In fact, he said as he looked at the library, he found that it was arranged topically and to some degree even chronologically as he looked through it. There were older conservative commentaries and standard Bible introductions that we get at seminary, at least the latter, a systematic theology. There were charts of the end times, Christian counseling books, church growth manuals, how-to books on developing groups and spiritual retreats, books on charismatic gifts and healing, books in the later years on social activism, liberal theology, and even liberal biblical studies. And then one final section he titled Christian Sarcasm. The library had been left behind. In fact, his successor heard about his ministry and writes this: "He did good work through all the years, trying one movement and then another. He pastored well, whether he happened to be a dispensationalist, a charismatic, a small group organizer, a church growth enthusiast, or a social activist. The movements he followed actually had little, if any, effect on his ministry, except in a fatal way. Ultimately, perhaps he confused following Christian movements with following Christ." In short, my read into this is that he had become distracted by trend-driven ministry and distracted by time-driven ministry. That he was caught up in so much, but he was not focused. In the foreground of Acts chapter 6, we find that the church is facing difficulties from persecution on the outside and also facing problems on the inside because the problem with Ananias and Sapphira in their lying to the church had created many problems. And then we come to Acts chapter 6, and there's the problem of distraction. The complaint that came from the widows evidently was legitimate because the 12, in a sense, admitted this has not been handled well. It needs to be handled well. But they saw that if they continued to try to handle all that, it was going to distract them from what was primary for them. The ministry of the tables and the ministry of the Word. One is not superior to the other. It should not become an either-or situation within the church. But distraction can take us away from our primary purpose. And at this school, our focus is on teaching people who would stand in the pulpit and stand in a lectern, and I'm using those metaphorically because I know not everybody stands where I do anymore. Some will be here, some will be there. I see some going so fast you can't keep up with them. But let's let the pulpit and the lectern stand as a metaphor. The pulpit is a reminder, when I come to it, that it was here before I got here. That somebody else stood here, whether it be here or at a church. That the pulpit belongs to God. And used to occasionally, when I would be a visiting minister, I would see written or on a sign on the pulpit, "Sir, we would see Jesus." I don't see that as often anymore. But it is a reminder that the church's pulpit belongs to God, and it is from that pulpit that we hear proclamation. And we want people well trained to do that proclamation. And the lectern is a reminder that instruction has always been important to the church. In fact, Jesus, in that last message that he gives to the disciples, or one of the last messages, go into all the world, teaching and baptizing them all, baptizing them and teaching them all that I've commanded you to do. The emphasis upon teaching and instruction. But that's not to say the tables ministry is not important as well. This minister seemed to get caught so much into those other things that he lost focus on what he was called to primarily do. We have a great responsibility at this church, or at this school, to help our students that entrust not only their education, but their very lives to us, to have them prepared to step into pulpits, to stand behind lecterns, to sit across the table from someone, and have them prepared to be able to tell the word. The apostles knew that the situation needed to be addressed, but they had to raise the question, how and who, and they did not get distracted. They came back to what was primary to them. Now, there's one aspect of this verse in verse 4 that I've not given enough attention to through the years. And that is, the apostles said, we're not only going to be focused on the ministry of the word, but we're also going to be focused on prayer. I've heard Daniel say it before, that in the mission field, he saw some missionaries flame out. Woody, you and I have seen it in ministers as well, that they flame out. Professors have seen it with fellow professors that flame out. And oftentimes the reason is the spiritual life, the prayer life, has not been attended to as well. I want to encourage our professors that as we teach this semester and this year, that we also attend not only to the Word, but to prayer. Teaching our students the importance of private prayer and public prayer. Because one of the things that I believe is true is that when someone leads a public prayer for the church and does it well, it helps the listeners learn how to pray more appropriately and better. So let's take into our teaching of the Word an emphasis on prayer as well. Pray with your students. Demonstrate to them what a good public prayer is, and help them do the same for their churches and to take it to them. To staff and administration, we're the table waiters. Your job is important. It's not less important. It's just as important, but it's different. Faculty, you probably were not up here early enough today. I shouldn't say it that way. You probably weren't around when Dave was out here before daybreak, changing light bulbs. All of that goes on behind the scenes. And yet, our work would not be done appropriately here without those who are waiting on the tables. I see board members with us tonight, and I'm thankful that you're here. We have the faculty here, there's students here, we have guests here. When I said our students have entrusted not only their education, but their very lives to us, as I listened to that story or read that story about the minister who left his library behind because he had gotten distracted, it put on me a burden I've never felt at the beginning of an academic year. And it's not just a burden, it's an opportunity that we have. But the responsibility that we have to lead these students to where they will go into churches better equipped and better prepared, not only to present the Word, but to teach the people to pray and to be praying with them. It haunts me to think about that minister that left his library behind. And even though he had been theologically trained, something went wrong, seriously wrong, for him to lose his faith in the process. I think back through the years that I've taught here, and I see some students that have walked the same path. Sometimes there's nothing we can do about it. But let's think of those who, for some reason, did not understand or did not learn how to distinguish between theological wheat and theological chaff. We have a great opportunity. And even though I feel a burden, it's also a joy, because God has entrusted this work to us. It's His pulpit, it's His lectern, but He has invited us to be His partners in this good task of ministry of the Word and ministry of the tables. And may He bless us as we commit ourselves to doing that work this year. And thank you for the work that you've already done in preparation and for the work that you're going to do day in and day out, because it does make a difference. God bless you in that.